Hey y'all Math 2 students, this video is the warm-up for lesson 9 in unit 6. This lesson is actually a review of unit 6, so we're going to go ahead and go over this problem to warm you up to those problems, and then stick around for the next couple videos to help you go over any questions that you had on the review to make sure you're ready for the test. So let's go ahead and take a look at this question here. It's all revolving around a function y equals negative x squared minus 2x plus 8. And in question number 1, it's asking for the x-intercepts. Okay, so remember the x-intercepts of a graph, the x-intercepts of the graph are where the graph crosses the x-axis. So these are my x-intercepts if this was my graph. The thing that they have in common is that the x-intercepts are when y is equal to 0. The value of the coordinate for y is 0. So I'm going to write that down. The x-intercepts are when y equals 0. Now, to solve for those, that means we are going to set the y value equal to 0. So we get 0 equals negative x squared minus 2x plus 8. And then from here, we just solve it. I'm going to factor out a negative 1 here to see if this is factorable. So we end up with x squared plus 2x minus 8. If at all possible, you want to try and make the x value or the a value in the x squared 1. If not, you at least want to make it positive if you can. But from here, we're going to continue factoring. So we'll do our quadratic factoring. That's going to be x plus 4 times x minus 2. You should be able to factor that pretty quickly. If not, you do the x and the grouping and everything else. Now from here, we apply the zero product property. The zero product property says that if you're multiplying terms and the result is 0, then that means one of those terms has to equal 0. Well, in this case, we're multiplying 3 terms. So we're going to say either 0 equals negative 1, 0 equals x plus 4, or 0 equals x minus 2. And we'll solve each one of those equations. Now, obviously, the first one is ridiculous. 0 cannot equal negative 1. But we still want to write it down because if there was an x out here, if it said negative 1x, if there was a common factor of x out of all these, then we would have another x-intercept here and we'd have to solve that. But in this case, we don't. So we subtract 4 from both sides. We end up with x equals negative 4. We add 2 to both sides, so we end up with x equals 2. Now from here, these are not my answers. These are the solutions to this equation, but they're not the answer to the question that was asked. The question was, what are the x-intercepts? The x-intercepts are, remember, coordinates. So it would be negative 4, 0 and 2, 0. So those are my x-intercepts on this parabola here. Okay? And then number 2, it says find the axis of symmetry. So number 2, find the axis of symmetry. Now you guys remember, hopefully, that in order to find the axis of symmetry, you apply the formula x equals negative b over 2a. And then in this case, we have an a value that is negative 1, a b value that's negative 2, and a c value that's 8. And so when I plug that in, I get x equals negative 2 over 2 times negative 1, which simplifies to 2 over negative 2, or negative 1. So my axis of symmetry is negative 1. Now, that's great. Number 3 now says to graph the parabola. I'm going to have to erase all this in order to graph it. But in order to graph it, the most important point of a parabola is the vertex. So I'm going to go ahead and find the vertex now. Even though it wasn't asked for, I'm going to have to do that anyways. Remember, to find the vertex, we have to plug in our axis of symmetry back into that equation. So that's going to say y equals negative 1 squared minus 2 times negative 1 plus 8. And then from there, we just simplify. So remember, we don't multiply first. We do exponents first. So negative 1 squared is 1 times a negative 1 is negative 1. Negative 2 times negative 1 is positive 2. And then plus 8. And that simplifies to 9. So our vertex is actually negative 1, 9. Okay? I'm going to go ahead and write these things down off to the side. We have x-intercepts. X-intercepts are negative 4, 0 and 2, 0. And our vertex is -1, 9. So I'll write those off to the side so I can erase all this in order to graph the parabola. So at this point, graphing a parabola should be as simple as graphing a line. Graphing a line was pretty easy for you guys in Math 1, especially once you mastered it. But at this point, you should be pretty comfortable with graphing a parabola. So we start off with the vertex, which is -1, 9. Running out of room here. So that's my vertex. We have our x-intercepts, which is -4, 0, and 2, 0. Okay. Now we don't want to just graph our parabola off those 3 points. We want to be as accurate as possible. So we want to apply our slope pattern to our graph as well. Now remember that the normal slope pattern for a parabola is when a equals 1, when the coefficient on the x squared is 1, our slope pattern is 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, ... In our case, the a value is -1. And therefore, we just multiply the original slope pattern by what we would maybe say the scale factor. So we'd multiply the original slope pattern by -1. We end up with -1, -3, and -5. And that indicates to us that negative indicates that this parabola is going to be opening down, and we can see that pretty easily. And we can see in the slope pattern, instead of going up 1 over 1, we're going to go down 1 over 1. So from here, we started our vertex. We go down 1 over 1. Then we go down 3 over 1, down 1, 2, 3 over 1. And then from there, down 5 over 1. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then over 1. So we end up actually at our x-intercept, so we know we did something right. The next one would be 7, so that's -7. So down, I'll go down another 7, and then over another 1. Remember, when you're doing these slope patterns, you're starting at the vertex, moving over, and then from that point you're moving over. From that point you're moving over. From that point you're moving over. And then we're going to do the other way. We're going to go down 1, back 1. Oops. Down 3, back 1. Down 5, back 1, which puts us right on our x-intercept like we wanted. And then down 7, back 1. We want to plot as many points as we can. Whatever you can put on the graph, make sure you do. And then you graph the parabola to the best of your ability from there. Okay, so something along that line. But if you just use 3 points to graph the parabola, that's not acceptable. You got to make sure that you hit every point that you can. That tells me that you understand the idea of a slope pattern. So stick around for the review. Make sure you understand all those problems. I really hope that you do well on this test.